Okay, so the next straight-to-video sequel we're going to talk about is Vacancy 2, The First Cut, which is interesting because we have talked about the first Vacancy on the channel before. I think I did it in a video with Identity, and so, the thing about my relationship with Vacancy is when you mention it to anybody else, they'd probably say, oh yeah, I saw that when it came out, or oh, I think I saw that maybe one time or something, and it was whatever. Um, I... It's hard to explain, I don't know, but I love Vacancy. I really love this movie, and I don't know. I've maybe seen it like 30 times, it feels like. It helps that it's so short. And yeah, it kind of came and went for a lot of people, but for me, it was just like this, relationship between Luke Wilson and Kate Beckinsale, who have just lost their child, and they're, driving out of the night after having been in a family gathering. They're about to get divorced. They seem to hate each other, and they break down in this really creepy place with, mechanic Ethan Embry and hotel manager Frank Whaley, and it just gets really creepy and weird and actually quite scary in this when you're trapped in this place with the snuff film angle, which is pretty wild, and then how things continue to get revealed as it goes. And like I said, I don't know what it is, whether it be like, the thrilling opening credit sequence or what it is, but I'm like always coming back to this movie. And I can tell you one thing I think it might be that ties us into what the straight-to-video sequel was. The one element of this movie that I particularly love is Frank Whaley's character and his performance, where he's the sort of weird hotel manager that you can't quite read, but there's something off about him, and then it becomes clear that he's like sort of running the whole operation, and he's like the main villain. And it's such an over-the-top performance in the best way. You can see, like, every single choice he's making as an actor in every single movie makes and every single expression. Usually that would be a bad thing for an actor, but in a movie like this, playing a role like this, it's delightful to watch him make every single individual choice of how fucking weird this guy is and how unsettling he is. And so, when you think about the fact that he appears to be running the operation with Ethan Embry and another faceless guy being his killers, you go to the concept of Vacancy 2, which is called The First Cut because it's a prequel to the first time this happened, like when this operation began. And it takes place 3 years prior. They tell us in opening text that the Pinewood, which is the motel in the first movie, got shut down, and then they found like over 200 tapes. And those are just the ones that were there, not even the ones that they, sent out and sold and all that. And so it says, this is going to take us back to the first victims, and that's going to be what Vacancy 2 is about. So, when I know this concept before I see the movie, but I don't know anything else, my thought process is, so if you're going to the start of this operation, that would mean the character that I love so much that brings me back to this movie all the time, is that the character we're seeing how he started this? Well, as it turns out, in an interesting choice, it is not about the manager who seems to be running the operation, nor is it about Ethan Embry's character, who we meet at the start and seems innocent, but then turns out is one of the killers. No, it's the third character, whose face we only see after he's dead, that apparently started this whole thing. So, and that is an actor named Scott G. Armstrong, who you may know, because everybody in the world has seen Titanic. And in particular, his scene in Titanic. He's the lookout that says, iceberg right ahead and pick up you bastards and stuff like that. Yeah, that's him. He hides his accent very well, because he seems like he's playing just this sort of hick-like character that's coming out of the darkness, with a woman that he murders, And that's what sets this whole thing off. That set off this whole operation that we're seeing happen with the snuff films in the first movie. So, going on that, there are a few interesting setups here, actually, going into it, when you know what the concept is. Because for starters, we do get a very because one of the things about the original movie was that opening credit sequence, where I specifically remember a lot of reviews even said, like, the first Vacancy movie peaks at the opening credits. Like, once the opening credits happen, it's all downhill. That's the best part about it. So, this one literally just begins with very generic white letters on a black background that just say Vacancy 2, the first cut. And that's all it says. And you think, oh wow, that's a way to not embrace the vibe that you started with, at least. But no, the fact that it is, the fact that it's the start of everything that happens, and it's the very start of how this whole thing went down, and it's like its infancy. It makes sense to start in a very bare bones place. So if you have a very bare bones title, that actually makes sense artistically, interestingly enough. So I'm fine with that. And then we have this interesting moment where our opening characters are honeymooners, which is a very interesting contrast to the first movie because it started with a couple who seemed to hate each other and were getting divorced. Now we're starting with characters who just got married and they can't keep their hands off each other. That's a really interesting sort of contrast to start with. And then there's the fake out of the fact that these aren't the first victims. This just gives us a glimpse of what the people who run this particular hotel, which is not the Pinewood, are doing, which is a voyeuristic thing. They're basically just recording sex and then selling it. And of course, it's like, that's extremely fucked up. And there's a ton of victims to this, but it's like, when you compare it to snuff films where people are being murdered, it's like, oh, so they got off light then. No, they're still unhinged characters, and they're still fucked up, and criminals. And it's David Moscow and a character named Reese, who appears to be Marv from Home Alone's little brother. So, and we'll run with that. And they're running this sort of voyeuristic operation, and then they stumble into what becomes this whole snuff film thing by accident, which I thought was a really interesting and unexpected way to kick the movie off. Because it's worth noting, the movie is written by Mark L. Smith, who is the writer of the original movie. So, right away there's something there, where it's like, oh, if it's coming from the same mind exactly, then maybe you'll be a little more open-minded going into it as a straight-to-video sequel, and how it sort of sets itself up as, this is where the events of the original movie began, just 3 years prior. So, once they stumble into that, we do meet our new characters, who are Agnes Bruckner, playing Jessica, I think her name is, her boyfriend, Caleb, and his best friend, Tanner. Tanner is R.J. Smith, who 90s kids might remember as Alan Strange. And these are the characters where it's like we get all the stuff in the first movie where Wilson and Beckinsale are having their dialogue about their kid and their life and all that, and it feels natural enough to me, the way we gradually get information about what it is they're going through. Of course, because we're now in a straight-to-video sequel, these characters basically speak in nothing but exposition. There are sentences that no three people that have known each other forever would say to each other. So we get all of our information about how he's working for her dad, she might be pregnant, he's known Tanner since they were 8, and we basically get their whole background. Like, there's actually a moment where Tanner gives so much exposition at once, he seems to take, like, a breath in after he says it, because he just said so much exposition at once. And then, yeah, so we introduce them, and then they show up at the motel, and then we know what's going to go on, because they have met this killer who decides, oh, well, if you recorded my killing while you were doing your own business here, let's just make it a snuff film business. Like, I'll do what I do, you guys do what we do, bam, we got a business. And so, it's interesting to start with that, and for that to kind of be the key to the movie's existence, because we get to see this movie a lot from their perspective, where most of the original movie is Wilson and Beckinsale's perspective. So, and the killers will just kind of pop up, and we don't quite know when, which is what makes the concept of the original movie so great, is that we never know when they're going to pop up. But it's more interesting than you would think to get it from their perspective, because they have their own conflicts going on, where they have stuff like the fact that Jessica and Caleb check in without telling them about Tanner. So there's a third person that they're not expecting that's going to already fuck this up for them. So they got to work their way around that, figure out how they're going to deal with that without, everything falling apart. We have more customers come in that they have to deal with, and they have to kind of cover up what's going on while there's people here that aren't going to become victims, that are walking in the middle of this. And there's that really clever moment where he's trying to call off the killer killing one of these new customers by flashing the no part of the no vacancy sign. That was really, and the way he sees it in the window of the car. That's a really good sort of visual to do that. And of course you have David Moscow, who's kind of in like the Frank Whaley part of this one, where he's much more unassuming than the Whaley character was, where he does actually play it up like, this is a guy where if you checked into his motel, you wouldn't really think anything's off. There is that great moment when they go in and they like ring the bell and they're waiting, and we see him walk in, and he stands there for a while before he makes his presence known, which is interesting. And then when he comes around and they do the whole thing, and like he seems normal and unassuming, and then just as they're walking out, he says, if you need anything, just scream, or something like that. And it's like, that's the thing. Or don't hesitate to scream. And it's like, that's the thing where it's like, he remembers that like 10 minutes later, and it's like, well, that was a weird thing to say. That was weird phrasing. But I kind of like the fact, like I said, I love Whaley's character and performance so much, because he just fits the vibe of the movie so much. But if you're going to go in a different direction, I like the fact that this guy is like really unassuming, and like it genuinely feels like there's probably nothing wrong here when you interact with this guy. And then, and because obviously the more dangerous people are the ones that are running around with bags on their heads. So, of talking about it being a Vacancy origin story, I kind of wouldn't have expected the masks to need an origin story. We get like the whole evolution of the masks that they wear, which just seem to be like these sort of generic camouflage masks, or what it looks like in the original movie. But they start as like bags, and then he mixes it up to like the screen that's on the door he cuts out and puts over his face. And then like in the last scene of the movie, he's like made the masks. I don't know how necessary that part of the backstory was, but okay, why not? Now they do make some interesting choices here as it continues, where Caleb, the boyfriend, or fiance, whatever he is killed pretty early. He's taken out of the equation pretty early, leaving Jessica and Tanner as the main characters. And what's interesting about that is the fact that Caleb just wasn't an interesting character. Caleb was very much expendable, despite seemingly being a co-lead. So for the writing to acknowledge that and just go ahead and kill him off and take Tanner, who was like the much better character, the much smarter character, he started off as like this seemingly supporting comedy character who is usually the first one to get killed. So to kind of have Tanner graduate to the co-lead with Jessica by killing off Caleb was a really fun and interesting choice, and the right choice, to add any sort of tension to this. To have a character like Tanner here who keeps saying stuff like, we just gotta go, like, don't worry about the bullshit, let's just leave, let's just do all that. Because, meanwhile, you have characters like Jessica who are, there's a moment when they get in the car and they realize the car is not starting because it's been tampered with, and so the killer's starting to pull up in his truck, or it might be Gordon who's pulling up in the truck very quickly, and the truck obviously does not run, and Jessica's response to Caleb is, hurry, get back in the car that this truck is speeding towards. I don't know. So, characters like that, and she goes into denial when Caleb is killed, which is believable enough. But Tanner's the one that really feels like the let's follow him character. He's the one that's making the decisions. the right decisions. And then we get to this point where they go to like this older couple's house, and this is another sort of trope we've seen in movies like this. And we know that you watch this scene and you're like, okay, two things are going to become of this old couple. Either they're going to get killed, or they know the motel guys. And either way, we're trapped. And they do something interesting here where they decided to go both. Where it turns out they know the motel guys, and the husband's already not liking this, because Tanner was swearing and all that. And there is a great moment when the the wife in the old couple says, like, you know, well, would Jesus do, like, would Jesus turn them away, or would Jesus let them in? And his response was, well, Jesus knows that, you know, if he gets his throat slit, he's going to come back anyway, so it doesn't, so the point is moot. So that's good. And then, yeah, the choice to have them both know the guys from the motel and end up getting killed off because this killer character, Smith, is uncontrollable. So something that doesn't really match up with his character. It's so weird how this character's uncontrollable, and he basically takes over the operation. Like, there is another thing about seeing it from the killer's perspectives is that there is that sort of power struggle where Gordon's the one that's like, I'm the manager, I'm running things, it's my operation, it started as my operation, you're, you know, just the killer now. And Smith, the killer, kind of starts to, you know, take over power a little bit, and he becomes uncontrollable. So the fact that he's like a subordinate of the Frank Whaley character that we never meet in this, I'm really curious where that transition is, because in that 3 years, that 3-year gap we're told this is, it's interesting. It feels like there's so much in the middle. There's so much in the middle that gets us to the original movie that we don't see. So there's a lot missing for considering it's a prequel movie. So when you're looking for stuff like that and continuity and stuff like that, that's gonna be really sort of unsatisfying in a way. I don't know for the life of me why Luke Wilson and Kate Beckinsale are actually in the end credits for like archive footage, but I don't remember seeing any footage of them. It must have been fleeting, like just enough to have to pay them. Using footage from the original movie, I don't know, but it does feel like you kind of have to look at it from its contained perspective rather than trying to connect the dots to the original movie, even though I feel like this is a case in particular where it would have been more fun to have more dots. Like we have no idea where the Frank Whaley character ever came from and how he became the head of the operation, but we do know the origin of the masks. It seems like really weird prioritizing. I don't know. But there is a line here that seems a bit tongue-in-cheek when Smith takes over the camera work from Gordon, and he says, you know, this movie-making shit's a lot harder than it looks. And it's like, to hear that from a straight-to-video sequel, movies that they're known for tending to be kind of in low quality, it almost feels like there's a tongue-in-cheek factor to that, where it's like making a movie is harder than it looks. And it's like it's almost like the filmmaker trying to say, we're making the best movie that we can. So, once again, this is one that's not terrible. And maybe it's just because I have such a soft spot for the first movie, where it's like the idea of there being another story in that world is interesting to me. And like kind of excites me in a way. So, like I said, if you're one of the many, many people that finds the first movie completely unremarkable, it's very unlikely you'll give a shit about this. So yeah, I don't hate this one or anything, and there's some intriguing new characters here. But there's also, you know, like, there's like some odd and clumsy transitions. That's something that kind of sticks out, like, on the technical front. Because the first movie also is so stylish. Nimrod Antal, the director, is a director I've praised plenty of times in the past. He went on to do Predators. He did that movie Armored with Matt Dillon, which I think is kind of underrated and fun. He's a very talented, very stylish director that did the original movie, and you don't get a lot of that here. Where it's like, you get, like, this movie almost feels like it's in the same world as The Strangers. rather than the world of Vacancy, and maybe it's only when you've seen Vacancy as many times as I have that you can distinguish the line. But like it's yeah, you get the sense that they're in the same world, kind of. Maybe the change in location changes that up a little bit, but yeah, it does feel like it's also connected to a different movie in many cases. Also, when you kind of lose some of those dots in the middle that don't connect, so or that maybe would have connected with like I don't know if there was ever a plan to fill in any more of this 3-year gap. I'm gonna probably doubt it, or, but I don't know if he wrote this one. I don't know if Mark L. Smith already had this one written, or if it was kind of like it made just enough money that we can do a straight to video thing if you want to type that up real quick, or if this is something he had like in mind, or if he has like deeper things in the story in mind. I don't know. It feels like there's a lot missing in between for a movie that's whole point was being a prequel. So yeah, I have mixed feelings on this one, but once again, for a straight to video sequel to a movie like Vacancy, I don't hate it. So and like I said, it usually helps a lot when you have somebody from behind the camera coming over, and a writer, the same writer, is a really good place to start on that. So yeah, I don't really have too many issues with this one for what it is. We are very much setting our bars in certain places when we talk about straight-to-video sequels, so that's how I feel about this one, and really it's just another excuse for me to gush about Vacancy again, because I just have this weird affection for that movie. That's so that's the way it is. So we're gonna keep continuing these and continuing all of our October stuff, and hopefully it's been fun and will continue to be fun. So until then, I think that's it.